Here are all the components for your robotics task. So you can see here that we have two motors, a battery pack, the Arduino sensor shield 5.0, the Arduino Uno board, the motor controller board, two infrared sensors, a Bluetooth receiver and transmitter, the ultrasonic sensor, and the servo motor. So these are all the electronic components that are needed to make your robot work. Here are all the electronics wired up together. So the first thing that we'll be doing is the ultrasonic sensor. So we'll need our Arduino Uno board, the sensor shield, the ultrasonic sensor, and 4 jumper wires, which are together. What we'll need to do is connect our sensor shield and our Arduino Uno board together, making sure the pins are aligned on the sensor shield. So the next thing that we'll need to do is wire up our ultrasonic sensor to our Arduino shield. We'll be using the 4 pins down the bottom. We'll plug in our 4 jumper wires in. Now we'll need to look at what wires are plugged into which spaces. So in our case here, we have the black wire in the positive position. So we'll need to make sure that when we plug in our ultrasonic sensor, that we actually have the black wire go to VCC and everything else in that same order. We will now plug in our Arduino board into our computer using the USB cable. We'll run and upload our code, and to test it out, we'll put our hand over it and just change the distance, and you'll be able to see. For the second task, we'll need to wire up our infrared sensors. So we'll need 3 pairs of jumper wires, our Uno board, our sensor shield, which is connected to our Uno board, and 2 infrared sensors. Now we need to wire up our infrared sensors using the 3 jumper wires. Now it's important that you actually get the order of these wires correct onto the Arduino Uno sensor shield, because it may actually damage the infrared sensors. So when we do plug them in, we need to make sure that we keep the same order for the wires. So in this case here, you can see that it's black, white, and grey. So ground being black, white being VCC or power, and out for being the sensor. Now we need to make sure that when we look at our Uno board that we can see that the pins go ground, voltage, power, and sense. So we need to make sure they are in the same order when wired up. Now when wired up correctly, we can see that when we cover up a sensor, it will turn on the LED, but also will show the change on our serial monitor. And here's a demonstration of that actually happening. Task number 3 is controlling the motors using the ultrasonic sensor. So I'm moving my hand off screen, but you can see as I bring my hand further away, the motors move faster, and as it comes closer, it is slowing down those motors, and we can see that on the serial monitor also showing that information to us. For task number 4, we're controlling the motors using the infrared sensors. So as we can see here that the sensors aren't picking up anything, so both motors are moving. If I cover one motor is moving. If I cover the other motor is moving. But if I cover both, they stop moving completely, and we can see that also on the serial monitor. So for the next part, we're going to be building our chassis. So we'll need our acrylic pieces. So the top chassis, the bottom chassis. Now the acrylic motor holders, there are 4 of them, 2 for each motor, or in the other kits you have 2 metal motor holders. We'll need to remove the paper off the acrylic first. You can use a flathead or your nails. So we're going to attach the motors to the base chassis piece. Now I'm going to show you doing it using the acrylic motor holders as well as metal wheel holders. So you'll need your 2 motors, you'll need the 4 long screws, 4 nuts. Now to do the acrylic one, we'll line it up to one of our motors and we'll push through one of the screws through the hole, and we can adjust the height of the acrylic after we've put all the pieces together and attached it to our bottom base. Now for the metal one, you'll do much the same. You'll need to line it up with the actual holes again and put our screws through. Now with the metal holder, you'll see that there's 2 screws on top just before. They need to be pointing upwards, so then you're able to screw in your holder into the actual bottom chassis. So we'll be needing to be flipped for your motors to be positioned correctly. Now I'm going to go through how to attach the acrylic motor holders. So we insert it through one of the rectangular holes there. We then need to line up our motor with the screws already in to those holes, as well as have the top T-bar section being on top of the acrylic, and then making those adjustments there so it fits in nicely. Then you'll need to screw on 2 of the nuts onto those actual screws. You can use your buddy to help you do this, or you can also use a pair of pliers and screwdriver like I'm showing here in the video. For the metal motor holder, you'll need to attach the 2 nuts onto the 2 screws you did earlier, and you'll need to tighten those up. And then you'll need these 2 small screws with the extra edges on them. What we'll need to do is line up our motor to that rectangular hole, then screwing in those 2 screws into the actual holes there, making sure they line up and they're tight. And that's just the 2 different motors attachment. We'll be attaching the rear caster wheel to the base, so we'll need 4 short standoffs, 8 short screws, and our caster wheel. Now we'll start off by screwing the 4 standoffs to the actual caster wheel. So the standoffs will go above the wheel. These need to be all done together. Once we have the standoffs and the screws in the back caster wheel done, we now need to screw in the caster standoffs into the acrylic base. And so we'll need to do that. Once we've done this, we now need to attach our big wheels to our motors. Now you can see that the wheels have kind of an oblong shape, okay, kind of rectangular, which matches the same shape as the motor pegs. So what we'll need to do is attach the big wheels to the motor pegs. Now I do suggest you do put your finger on the other end of the motor peg so you don't push the motor out of position, which can happen. It is a pressure fit. Once you've done those 2 big wheels, it should look like this. Now we need to attach our motor board to our base chassis. So we'll need to have 4 screws, 4 nuts, and our motor board. So what we'll need to do is screw in our motor board into the position on our chassis, as you can see here. So we have the terminals for the power facing forward and our wires for the actual connection to the Arduino Uno at the back. And then we need to screw those in. So once we've screwed our motor board to our bottom chassis, we now need to put our wires from the motors through into the terminals. So there's 2 little holes just where the terminals are. And what we can do is thread those through those little holes So we can do some wire management. Once we've threaded those through, we can now screw in our wires into terminals. So you will need to undo the screw to loosen the terminal up, and then you will need to put the wires in and then tighten it up. Now it is important that you do screw in the terminals very well, as your robot will be moving around and it can become loose if you don't tighten them up enough. Do also check which way you are wiring up those terminals, as your code can be affected by it, so you may need to swap the code around. Now when we look at our motor board, we can see that we have 8 pins to connect to our Arduino shield, so we need 8 jumper wires. We'll plug those in. Now we need to keep a track of what wires go to which pins, so it might be good when you're working with your buddy to actually monitor or write down which wires go to what position. Those positions for the Arduino sensor shield are listed later on when connecting these jumper wires to the actual shield. Now to do the Arduino Uno and the battery pack to the actual top chassis, so you'll need to have 3 screws and 3 nuts for the Uno, and we'll need to have 2 screws and 2 nuts for the battery pack. Now you will need to use the 2 screws that have the extra width head on it, much like the one for the metal wheel holder, as they are flatter and will be better to be put in. As we can see, that's where the Uno will go. Make sure it lines up with the holes and then screw it all into place. Next, what we'll be doing is attaching the top chassis to the bottom chassis. Now we have the 4 long standoffs already screwed in each of the corners, as you can see. And then we need to line up the holes for the chassis connection. So you'll need to have 4 screws to connect to those posts. Once they are screwed in, like shown here, we now need to do some wire management by putting those 8 jumper wires from the motor board through that large circle hole in the middle of the top chassis. So then you're able to connect it to your Arduino Uno sensor shield and the actual board itself. Now it is a little bit finicky to get it through. Okay, now if you haven't already done it, you will need to attach your sensor shield to the Uno board to go further in the actual project. You may want to pause the screen here or look at the slides, and you can see the actual layout of the wires for the Uno sensor shield and the motor board jumper wires. Now the next step is to connect our battery pack to our motor shield. Now you'll see that we have 2 loose wires here, and then in the middle we have this. So what we really need to do is not plug in the barrel jack into the Arduino Uno, as if you have the battery pack and the Uno plugged in together as well as a motor board, it will send power to both at the same time, which becomes very detrimental if you try to plug in the robot into the actual USB ports. So what I'm doing here is lining up the wires underneath, and then what we can do is screw into the terminal positions, so the VCC as well as the ground. Now it's important you get the polarity right, so red being positive and black being negative. And you can see here I'm using that open hole at the top to actually unscrew those. Once we've done that, you and your buddy will need to wire up that together, which will be a little bit finicky. As you can see here, this is the wiring of it all. You can put the barrel jack underneath and it can just sit there. Next we have our servo and our ultrasonic sensor to be put together. So here we have the ultrasonic sensor with the 4 jumper wires. We then have our pieces for the actual servo holder. We have our servo motor in the top right, and then we have 2 baggies of screws and plastic components. See this piece here for the servo holder? It's not going to be needed for this task. So what you will need to do is, once you have taken it out, give it to Mr. Dunn to use for another project. So with the servo motor, it actually clips into the actual 2 arms there, You can see that there's a space there for it and it lines up nicely for it. Now once we put that into position, we get the other one. As you can see, I'm turning that around. Once you've got that into the correct position, we can see that there are two holes on one of the sides. Okay. Now with those two holes, we'll need to use two of the self-tapping screws. Okay, now with the self-tapping screws, they will grab onto the actual plastic and make a permanent hole in it. So our next step is to actually screw those screws in. So you'll need to use one of the smaller Phillips head screwdrivers to actually put it in. And then it will take a little bit of force to actually screw it into position, as you can see here, and both of them need to be screwed in correctly. For the next component, we need the servo base piece, white crossbar, and 4 self-tapping screws. The white crossbar goes into the space provided in the base piece. Now you can see it does have a cup or a circle at the top, which is the right size for the actual servo motor. So what we'll need to do is flip it over and actually screw in those self-tapping screws into the holes provided there. Now you will need to use some force, and that crossbar does provide a bit of resistance, so be careful of this. Now we are screwing in upside down because we don't want the actual screws to be protruding towards the base, as they will block the base and chassis together. Again, you'll need to use one of the small Phillips head screwdrivers to do this part. What we need to do now is attach our ultrasonic sensor to the servo. What we'll do is we need to attach it upside down like so, and so we actually have those jumper wires facing the top. Now the only way to actually attach is by using the holes on the side of the servo motor holder and using 2 zip ties. Now my suggestion is to thread through one of the zip ties through the hole and then just zip it up to the first 1 or 2 clicks. Okay, like so. It is important to do that because it'll make your life a little bit easier, and do the same thing on the other side. So you've made 2 loops. It is important you don't create the loops before putting it through the holes there. Okay, so once we have those 2 loops done, we can then put our ultrasonic sensor there, and what we'll do is put the zip tie around one of the eyes and then the other eye. And then once those are in position, you then zip the actual zip ties up, creating a firm hold for the ultrasonic sensors. Once they are tightened sufficiently, what we'll need to do is trim off the excess. So what you can use is the side cutters provided, or using a pair of scissors to trim off the excess. Now do be aware that the edges of the zip ties with our cut may be a little bit sharp, so it would be best to actually put those cut ends behind it so your fingers don't get close to it. The next thing that we need to do is actually attach our servo holder to our base piece. Now I will rant a little bit. The holes at the front of the base of the servo holder are actually too small for our screws to go through. So what we'll need to do is drill the holes out. Mr. Dunn will provide the drill and do those for you. But this is one little annoyance about the kits provided. So what we need to do is attach the servo base to our chassis base. So we have the 2 long screws provided Mr. Dunn and 2 nuts. They will go through the holes of the servo base and the chassis base. Now you can see that drill bit there. The other annoyance is that we do need to drill the holes a little bit bigger to actually match the holes on the servo base. Once those holes have been drilled, we can then attach our servo base to our chassis base. So we'll put one of the long 32mm screws into the servo base, and then the other, and then we'll line it up to those holes that have been drilled out a little bit more. Once we have inserted those screws, we'll then use the 2 nuts, and we need to screw them in all the way so it creates a snug fit for our servo base and Arduino robot. So now we'll be adding our infrared sensors So we'll need two small standoffs, two screws, and our infrared sensors, which are wired up to the jumper wires. Now it's important to make sure you mark down or remember which way the wires are, because as before, we need to plug them into the correct positions. So we'll need to screw in our standoffs about halfway into the actual long screws we did before for the servo motor. Now these can be adjusted to tighten up the actual ultra infrared sensors. So you'll need the assistance of your buddy to actually put the screw through the hole already made in the infrared sensor and then into the standoff. As you can see here, once I've tightened up that screw as far into the standoff, you can see that the infrared sensor is quite loose and move around. So what you actually need to do is tighten the standoff onto the actual screw there. So you can do that manually like I'm doing here. Okay, be careful to PCB and the other standoff. It won't be 100% tight, but we want it to be as tight as possible. Once you've put the first one on, it's going to be really hard to do what I did just then. Now what we need to do is actually screw in the infrared sensor into that other standoff, and you might need to tighten that standoff as it is there. What you'll see me do now is that once the standoff and the screw are together, you can see it is a bit loose. So we'll loosen that screw up a bit. Now, once we've got that all screwed together, we need to put our infrared sensors through our positions. So the best place to do it is through those little cross cutouts next to the motor pegs. And then we'll need to put it through that top hole there. Now it is important that you do the wiring correctly for the infrared sensors. So as we can see on our ones here, we've got ground, voltage, and sense on both of them. Okay, so it goes blue, green, yellow, and then on the other one it goes orange, red, brown. Now, if they are wired incorrectly, it can damage and make the infrared sensor faulty. So when we do plug in those into our position there, into pins 4 and 2, you'll need to make sure you do get the correct order of wires when plugging it in, so it does match up nicely. To wire up the ultrasonic sensor to our sensor shield, we need to plug in those jumper wires. Again, taking note of which wires go to which position, and we'll plug them into those ultrasonic sensor pins there. So we'll take a twist to get it in the correct order, but you need to make sure that VCC and the positive for the ultrasonic sensor match up. And then all we need to do is plug it in. Now we need to plug in our servo motor into the number 3 position on the sensor shield, noting that the orange wire goes into the positive, and because they're all stuck together, it will be nice and easy to plug in. What you can do to make it a little bit nicer is actually wrap that servo wire around the ultrasonic wires. Now, one last thing for this is that we haven't plugged in the Bluetooth module yet. Don't plug it in yet. Leave it out, as what will happen is it will interfere with you programming the actual Arduino board, as it will pick up as another port. So do not plug it in, and it will be used later on when we move on to networking.